Welcome to Girl Read Your Bible, Sunday School for adults who missed it. I'm Nicole Woltz, your host for this podcast, brought to you by 522gals.com, a website dedicated to personal development and spiritual growth. Go check it out, sign up for our email list so that you never miss a thing. And speaking of important, valuable things, we are starting a brand new series. We are going to spend the next several episodes talking about an extraordinary, important, historical person in the Bible. Very important key player here. Now, everybody's important. There's story made it in the Bible, so we have things we can learn from everyone. But today, we are starting our series on the life of Moses. And Moses is I want to say an extraordinary person. He has so much impact throughout history, and many parts of his story is still referenced today. One of the really amazing things that's unique about Moses is that we get to see parts of his entire life. We get to see his key moments throughout the journey of his life. We see his birth. We see significant movement in his life. We see significant calls to action. We see some midlife crisis. We see interactions with God. Moses is an extraordinary leader, an important person for us to know his story. And even though he lived thousands of years ago and was the leader of a large group of people, things that you maybe don't relate to, because I don't know about you, but I don't lead a large group of people, nor is that in the plan for my future in any way. So you might say, how is Moses's life going to be relevant to me? Well, it is. We are still going to, and that's what's so incredible about the Bible, we are going to see some incredible takeaways that is still going to be relevant to you on your spiritual growth walk, and to helping you understand things and see God show up in your life in the same way that he showed up for Moses. And so there's a lot of really good takeaways. Plus, this is a really valuable series and story to know because it is like very foundational in the history of the Jewish people and therefore in the history of Christianity. So it is really valuable, and I am excited to go over these next several episodes and the life and impact of Moses. And so we are going to get started. Moses' story is found in the book of Exodus. And I'm going to take a minute just to set some foundation and back up a little bit. If you've been listening for a while, you may have already gone through the book. We've already gone through the book of Genesis, and then we took a break and moved over to some other things. And so we're kind of going back to doing things chronologically for a little while. So we already went through Genesis. Exodus is the next book that comes right after. So we finished up a series that we did on Joseph, and I love Joseph. That's an incredible series. And that's how the people ended up in Egypt. And that's really important, valuable, so many good things to get out of the story and life of Joseph. So if you haven't listened, you're going to want to go back and listen to the episodes on Joseph to see how the Israelite people have ended up in Egypt. And that's where the story gets started and where it takes place. And a significant period of time has passed. There is discrepancies, arguments, whatever, about exactly how much time has passed based on like when we're keeping dates. They have genealogy and chronological stuff, and they're like, well, did this start here and when this person was born, or did this start when this person was, this age? Or so we're not exactly sure definitively on how much time has passed, but it's a couple hundred years. It's been a long time since the life of Joseph, the life and death of Joseph, and to the beginning of the story of Moses. We've got a significant time period because generations have passed, and that's what's going to bring us into the turmoil that will start us off in Exodus. So we're going to start reading, and then I will talk to you about it, and we will pick it apart and see how it's relevant for our lives because there's so much good stuff to know. So we're going to start in Exodus chapter 1. And normally I kind of skip over reading all the names for you. I want you to read the Bible for yourselves, girls. But today I'm not going to, because these names matter today. They still matter today. So I want to talk about that just for a moment. It starts verse 1. These are the names of the sons of Israel. That is Jacob. Remember, Jacob's name was changed to Israel, and they had moved to Egypt with their father. And so Jacob had 12 sons, very important. Their names are Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. In all, Jacob had 70 descendants in Egypt, including Joseph, who was already there at that time. Now they're going to multiply and grow. Now, Joseph, important to note, has two sons, whose names are Ephraim and Manasseh. And the reason I wanted to give you that backstory and tell you and why that's significant is because the names I just read to you, plus Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, make up the 12 tribes of Israel to this day. Like, these are the 12 tribes of Israel. You'll see them play out and mentioned throughout the Bible from here on out. So it's important to understand who these patriarchal figures are. These are where we get the 12 tribes. Now, you might have noticed that I just read off 13 names. So I want to clarify that there are 12 tribes, 12 territories, that once they get to the promised land, which that's way ahead, but it's going to happen throughout this book. So once they get to the promised land, they are going to have like territories and different areas, and that they're broken up by tribes based on who is their father out of the people that I just read. With the exception of Levi, and this is important too, history, I'm just giving you some insight. Levi's descendants will be the priesthood, and the priesthood doesn't have their own land and territory. They serve the people, and they are, the representatives of the Lord. And so, like, they're the pastors of the day, or how the priests, however you want to call it. They are the spiritual leaders. They're the priesthood. And so that's why there's Ephraim and Manasseh make up 2, for Joseph being 1, and now we have 13, but there's still 12 tribes. Did that make sense to you? I hope it does. It's still relevant today. That's why I wanted to go over that with you, so you have some understanding, especially when you're seeing things, throughout biblical scripture and context, and they're always saying they're from the tribe of Dan. They're from the tribe of Ephraim. They're from the tribe of Judah. These are significant things, and this is the backstory. So you're getting that layer of who these people are and why they matter, why that is referenced. And so this is like very foundational, and seeing how history has developed. So I think it's super interesting. And I love to share that kind of stuff, because it's just seeing how God is always working in this really big picture way that we can't even hardly wrap our heads around, right? It's just incredible to see how that things that happened so long ago and these people have, significance and relevance today. That's just incredible. We're going to keep reading, and we're starting in verse 6. In time, Joseph and all of his brothers died, ending that entire generation. But their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely powerful and filled the land. Eventually, a new king came to power in Egypt, who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. Paul's very important, especially if you hadn't heard that episode or don't know what I'm talking about, because maybe this is the first one you're listening to. I don't know. Joseph rescued the Egyptian people. Joseph interpreted a dream that the King Pharaoh had had. And so he had used that knowledge to then save the people, and in turn save his own family from the famine that was going to be 7 years, that could potentially wipe out the population or cause great devastation. And so he was elevated to a great position of honor at one point. He was second to the king. He was a big deal, and he was appreciated by the Egyptian people. But what this is trying to tell us is that so much time has passed. We're talking generations now, and that history and appreciation has disappeared from memory. People are not talking about this anymore. It's irrelevant. And so now all this new King Pharaoh is seeing is these foreign people, these non-Egyptian people are in our land, and they are multiplying in droves, and they are very powerful, and he gets afraid. And actions out of fear are always cause for problems. And so we're going to keep reading. He says, starting in verse 9, he said to his people, "Look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape from the country." So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves, and they appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with the crushing labor. They forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramses as supply centers for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks and do all the work in the fields. They were ruthless in their demands. Then Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. "When you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live." But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives. "Why have you done this?" he demanded. "Why have you allowed the boys to live?" "The Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women," the midwives replied. "They are more vigorous and have their babies so quickly that we can't get there in time." So God was good to the midwives, and the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. This is a big one. Pay attention. "Throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, but you may let the girls live." Let's stop. We don't need to unpack a whole lot, but we'll unpack just a little bit here. First of all, I think it's important, and we skip right over this. The Hebrew people, which is the Jewish people, the Hebrew people are repeatedly called powerful, strong. They outnumber us in our land. And yet, the Egyptians devised a plan and made them slaves. And I'm sure it doesn't give us the details, right? But we know how the world works. I'm sure that happened over a period of time. I'm sure that took some effort and details. Here we have King Pharaoh here talking to these midwives and giving them an instruction, and they are refusing to listen because they fear God. So here's our reading between the lines. I'm telling you, there's a great multitude of powerful people who caved for whatever reason, who didn't stand up for themselves. The Egyptians were afraid that they could and would, and so they, enforced their will on them and made them slaves. That's crazy. And the people let that happen. I think that's something that we kind of skim over. We're just getting to the good stuff in the story. That's important part to know and to consider. That, because often, I'll be honest, real life stuff here, when I'm reading certain things in the Bible, I get a little contemplative and confused. And I wonder why God allows certain things to happen. And that's true in my own life today, that I'm like, I don't understand why you let things happen. But when I was reading this is a takeaway that's like a side note, but it was really impactful to me. So I hope it's for you too. They were powerful and great in number, but they let it happen. Here we've got the powerful Egyptians who, we portray as we think are powerful, and they're afraid. So they act out of fear and cause turmoil and treat people horribly because of the fear that they have that they're going to be overthrown, because they already see this great nation as a threat. But this great nation allows it to happen. Friends, there's a takeaway there that says sometimes it's not about what God let happen. It's about what we let happen. These people were powerful, and their newfound enemies recognized it, but they didn't recognize their own strength. So they allowed themselves to be in this vulnerable, horrible situation. I think it could have been, this is me, my opinion, perhaps could have been avoided had they stood up for themselves, had they even recalled. This would have been a storytelling. I feel that these people, I'm confident that these people knew the story of Joseph and what he had done. And I feel like they could have stood up for themselves. They could have reminded the Egyptians of the story of Joseph and how their people actually helped to save one another, and how, they could bring unity. There's other things that I think and believe could have happened here, but instead, they didn't stand up for themselves. They were weak. And as a result, many years must pass of their being in slavery and being in poor conditions and having this negative things. Negative sounds so, not simple enough, right? Like that's way too simplified. But having this oppression on them because of something they allowed to happen. And I think that is a huge takeaway. I know it is for me, is that you are more powerful than you think. And you really need to stop and think about that. And what are you allowing? Sometimes we get upset like, God, how did you allow this financial disaster to happen in my life? Well, God's like, well, you made poor choices with your money. So I didn't allow this to happen. You created a disaster because you didn't use the power of your brain to make good decisions or what have you. That's a small example compared to what they're dealing with. But I'm just saying there are some times where we get, having our conversation with God and saying, wow, why is this happening to me? Or why have you allowed this turmoil in my life? And God's like, you probably did this yourself, but in his love and mercy and grace, you will endure trial and turmoil for a short time. And when you call on the Lord for help, he will show up. And we're going to keep reading because we're going to see that. That was a very important thing to me to unpack because I think that's a huge takeaway. It makes an impact in my life. But there's a second thing that I want to talk about here too, because I think it's really cool. These women rarely get the praise that they deserve. And since we did just wrap up the Extraordinary Women series, they're briefly mentioned here, but what their action shows great respect and also ties in with what I just said. These two midwives who were ordered by a very oppressive and dangerous king, right? Like he's trying to kill babies. Like that's the worst kind of person. And so they go against him. They defy his orders and they pretty much lied to him. I'm not sure. Maybe they just wouldn't go and help. I'm not exactly sure the details of the situation, but they didn't do what he asked, and then they made up a story. And perhaps when they found out that the Hebrew women were having babies, they didn't go help so that they could not be held responsible for, I don't know how it exactly played out. Perhaps they lied, but for the sake of saving babies, I think that's the one time when it's probably okay. That's me again. I can't back that up. In any case, they are rewarded by God for being respectful of him and his people. They said, no, we're not doing that because they feared the Lord. How incredible. I mean, how courageous, how strong, how unselfish, because they were putting their own lives in danger. I want you to know and understand, here's a king who's like, yeah, we're going to have to thin the herd. Their population's getting out of control. So I'm going to tell the midwives to just get rid of the baby boys, because that's going to thin the strength, the strong population, the population that could go to war or rise up against us, right? That's why he chose the boys, not all the babies. In any case, he's threatening that. So definitely he's the type of king that's going to off with your head if you're not following my instructions. It's very clear that he is diabolical. And they defy him because they fear the Lord. Fear and that's not afraid of, that is have great respect for, okay? Follow, believe in, have great respect for. They honor the Lord. They honor God and believe in God, which also, reading between the lines, lets us know that there's still, among the Hebrew and Jewish people, there's still talking about God. They're still honoring God. They're still talking about the past and the things that have happened. There's still honor and respect among a great many people that they also fear and honor God in this way. And they say, no, we're not doing that. And they risk their own lives to not carry out the Pharaoh's command. That's an incredible act of unselfish courage, to do the right thing because we honor God more than we fear for our lives. These women do not get enough credit, okay? But as a result, God shows up, God sees them, and God bless. And it makes a point of telling us that God shows up and blesses them and gives them families of their own because they have done right in his eyes. That's noteworthy, friends. That's worth knowing. So let's keep reading, because we're getting to, again, the relevant and good part, because this all had to happen in order for the story of Moses to be so incredibly memorable. We're already in Exodus chapter 2. About this time, a man and a woman from the tribe of Levi got married. Just remember, I just said Levi is going to be the tribe that is the priesthood. And so this significant that they're from the tribe of Levi. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was a special baby and kept him hidden for 3 months. Because what just happened? The King Pharaoh there said, we're throwing all the babies in the river. We are wiping out the Hebrew population. And this was legitimately happening, we know, because here's this woman who is hiding her baby from this. I think it's adorable that it says she saw that he was a special baby and kept him hidden. And that's interesting, because I think literally every mother sees their baby and is sure he is a special. I have 3 children. Every one of my children are very special babies, very special adults. So I think that's, in the eye of the beholder there. But in this case, she happens to be right in an extraordinarily different way. In any case, I just think that that's cute, that sentence makes it into, the history of everything, right? She saw that he was a special baby and kept him hidden for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a basket made of papyrus reeds and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. She put the baby in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the riverbank of the Nile. And the baby's sister then stood at a distance, watching to see what would happen to him. Pause. Because before we can get to the really good stuff, I want you to consider, this is where we're going to use our God-given imaginations and really consider this part of the story, because it was just a short paragraph, but there's so much going on for us, right, girls? Put yourself in this mama's shoes. They're under the rule of a diabolical king who is trying to wipe out their population. And you have a child and they're special. It tells you she loved him. She had great love and joy over her child. And she tries to hide him, which again would be at risk of her own life. And when she can't hide him anymore, because maybe he's crying too much, or maybe he's getting too big, for whatever reason, she knows that the time is short. She can't hide this baby anymore, and she is still afraid of what's going to happen. she devises a plan to try to protect him. We don't get the details of why this was the plan, or what she was hoping might happen. But so we have to guess, right? We have to just think about what you might feel in her shoes. And so for her to put the baby in a basket and waterproof it and send it down the Nile, she probably had some hopes. There is some context that we should know. The Nile River would have been a popular bathing spot and a place where other people, so she might have, I would have to guess that she is hoping for a rescue of some kind, hoping that God provides. But my heart goes to thinking about this woman who has a 3-month-old baby who is weaving a basket. Like just the act and the time that takes, and with every stroke of her hand, with every pulling of a papyrus reed, right? With every painting of, I want to say like a tar type thing of however she's waterproofing it in that day and age, right? With every act of building this small ark for her baby, her heart has to be so heavy. This has to be such a tremendous, again, act of courage. The Bible doesn't specifically say to us that she was led in this or that the Lord told her to do this. This is, again, where we read between the lines, and I'm going to just tell you, this is my opinion based on my experiences, so I don't want you to be confused about what I'm adding here. Read the Bible for yourself. This is an add-in here. For me, I think we get ideas, sparks, heart sparks, comes from the Holy Spirit, comes from God giving you an idea that's going to provide salvation, that's going to provide life, that's going to restore hope. And so I believe that that's what happened for her, that she got this heart spark. And this idea didn't come from nowhere. This idea came from the Lord. And then here we have his older sister, who isn't named yet, but I'll tell you, spoiler alert, her name is Miriam. And she is watching this baby. So she's gone down with her mother, put this baby in the river, and she is watching to see what happens. And the mom is not there. She's not stayed to watch, probably couldn't bear to watch. But Miriam is keeping an eye on her baby brother basket to see what the Lord will do. That's what I believe is happening in between the lines here. And now we're getting to the really good part. We're in verse 5. Soon Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her attendants walked along the riverbank. When the princess saw the basket in among the reeds, she sent her maid to go and get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby. A little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This must be one of the Hebrew children," she said. Then the baby's sister approached the princess. "Should I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" she asked. "Yes, do," the princess replied. So the girl went and called the baby's mother. "Take this baby and nurse him for me," the princess told the baby's mother. "I will pay you for your help." So the woman took her baby home and nursed him. Later, when the boy was older, his mother brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son, and the princess named him Moses, for she explained, "I lifted him out of water." Oh my gosh, can we just talk about the miracle that just happened? Because we've got a long list, right? First of all, God's timing. God's incredible timing. Because if you're this woman, you might feel like, God, are you seriously giving me a baby boy right now? Because the baby boys are under attack. Like, this is terrible timing. But she tries her best to keep him safe and to rescue him. And then she has this heart spark and she devises this plan of putting him in the river. And I think that she's hoping that some Egyptian woman will find him and take pity on him. That's just me. That's me thinking that might have been her hope for putting her baby in a basket, setting him down the river, that some other person that's going to be able to raise him will find him so that she doesn't have to lose him completely. And then she's probably off in her home just bawling, as I would be, right? Like, that's too much to handle. And the sister here is watching this happen. And it's not just any random other person or Egyptian woman or some other tribal person who finds this baby in a basket. It's the princess. Like, the princess, the king's daughter. So who has more pull with a dad than a daughter? Who has the best shot at rescue, right? The king's daughter is the person who finds this baby. That is extraordinarily above all that you could ask or think. If you need someone to rescue your child, the princess of Egypt is the best case scenario. What we also see is that immediately she feels sorry for him, the princess. She sees the baby. She's like, this must be one of the Hebrew babies. And she feels sorry, which tells us also right away that she's probably pretty assuredly here not in agreement with her father's decree. She has pity on him and she wants to keep him as her own, like, immediately. Like, she's looking at this baby. She feels sorry for him. And the sister interjects immediately and she's like, would you like me to find a Hebrew woman who could nurse him for you? Because I can do that. Like, I know some. Meanwhile, never even saying, like, I know where the baby's mom is, because that would be conflict of interest. So instead she's like, I know a lady who could take care of me. They didn't have formula back then, friends, so we had nursemaids. So she's saying, I can get a nursemaid for you. Meanwhile, the nursemaid she's picking is the mom. Crazy, right? Like, the Lord works in incredible ways. When you think all hope is lost and you have a heart spark and the Holy Spirit is telling you to do something seemingly ridiculous, right? Seemingly crazy, to put your baby in a basket and float it down the river. I mean, then the princess finds it. Don't miss this. That's so big and impactful for our lives. When the Lord gives you a crazy idea, you can trust that He has something planned that you can't even think of yet, that is above and beyond all you could ask or think. Because I highly doubt it entered her mind that, maybe the princess will find my baby and raise my baby. And that's not even the best part. Aside from the fact that now the baby is going to be safe, the baby is going to be raised by the king's daughter, which means he's going to have the best food and education and the best life possible away from being with his family. Like, this would be the best second case scenario. And in this instance here, best case scenario of just being raised with your family isn't even an option. So this is the absolute best case scenario. And we're not done yet. Keeps getting better. Now the mom gets to raise him until he's weaned, which for that at that time would take years. It wasn't like 6 months or 12 months like we kind of see now. That would have went on for several years. And there's discrepancy. I tried to look this up. Different ages, somewhere around 5. Some people think it was even as long as 12 until they were considered like able to leave. I actually personally believe it was more like 5, but that's neither here nor there. It would have been years. It wasn't just like till 12 months or what have you with the weaning process. And so that is incredible, because now the mom gets to raise her child without fear. She's got something, a seal from the princess or whatever that now protects her child, because it's technically the princess's child, and she's able to raise her son without fear. And because God is so good and it can't stop getting better and better and better, she's also going to be paid for it. She's raising her own kid without fear in this tumultuous time and is being paid for it. And I promise you, just because I know how the world works, that her household, I'm sure, is getting some special favor because she's got the mark of the princess with her. She's raising the princess's adopted son here. And so that means I'm sure that their household would have been getting some extra generosity from perhaps guards or things like that. So it doesn't even talk about that. That's just me jumping to conclusions because that would make sense. And because things just keep getting better. Why did it keep getting better? Because, my friend, this woman listened to what was happening in her heart. She followed what she felt and had hope that something amazing was going to happen. And as a result, God did this. This is a huge miracle that people rarely even ever emphasize. So I am going to, because this is how God will show up in our lives too. This is the same, friend. You can have these same incredible, miraculous things happen. And I don't want you to miss them in your life either. Because sometimes big, incredible things do happen in our lives. And we kind of just like, wow, that was cool. Like, no, be really excited. See how excited I am about this? Go ahead. Celebrate the things that God has done. Because God took this terrible, difficult, incredibly beyond hard situation and turned it into literally the best case scenario. The princess will now be responsible. My son is going to have everything, and I'm going to get paid to safely raise my baby in tumultuous times. Beyond all that you can ask and think, friends, and you can believe God for the same kind of acts in your life. Meanwhile, also relatable for us, Moses, who doesn't know anything yet, who isn't a big deal yet. He's special to his mother. We see that. She saw he was a special baby. But he doesn't recognize God yet. He doesn't fear. He hasn't earned any kind of special treatment specifically. However, before he could even process God is protecting him and writing his story, which doesn't mean every part of the story is going to be good and nice and easy. That's never how it works. Put that out of your mind. But God is already protecting him and writing his story. It's not about earning it. It's about responding to it. And his mother at this stage, on behalf of his life, is responding to something she's feeling on the inside. And his life is going to be miraculous as a result. Oh, good stuff, but we're going to keep reading. Because that's what it tells us. And then, she takes him to the palace when he's older, and there he is. And so he's going to learn, like I said, he's going to get top-notch education and all those types of things, be very protected. He is adopted as Pharaoh's daughters as her own son. That's a big deal. And now we're in verse 11. Many years later, when Moses had grown up, he went out to visit his own people, the Hebrews, and he saw how hard they were forced to work. During his visit, he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Hebrews. After looking in all directions to make sure no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid the body in the sand. Stop. I got to tell you some really important things, because all we got was, this amazing, miraculous thing that happened in his childhood, and then he went to the palace. It's important for you to know that he is probably roughly right around 40 years old at this time. Right around. Okay? Maybe 38. He's right around 40 years old at this time. He has grown up and spent his adulthood and his life in a palace. This says many years later, he went out to visit his own people. So this is me saying kind of a midlife crisis. We're not at midlife yet, but still, he's having kind of a crisis. He's significant, I think, pretty old at this point to be adulting and to be like, I'm going out to see my people. Something has happened that we don't get to know about. But we understand, right? Because we're people and we have things that happen. Something is stirring in him. Something is making him remember and realize and consider the plight of the adopted. And he is saying, these are not my people. And I need to go and see the conditions of my people. Maybe he's heard some things. Maybe he's feeling guilty about being in a good situation while he knows his people are having a bad situation. And when he goes out to visit his people and see what's really going on in the land, he sees them being beaten, and he's immediately has a strong, intense response in his heart. He's angered and ferocious because it leads him to murder. And this is an important thing to know about Moses, his reaction in anger and, and it's not a quick, like it wasn't this, mistake that he made. It was intentional. It makes a point of telling us because it says on verse 12, after looking in all directions to make sure no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid the body in the sand. Friends, that's what we like to call premeditated murder. He would be in big trouble in today's court system. He didn't just react in rage in a moment. He looked around in all directions to make sure no one else was looking. And he did a bad job, by the way, because we'll get to it. But I'm just telling you, he was not a good looker around her. And then he goes and hides the evidence. That's a whole thing to really know about the start here of Moses's adulthood story. The next day, when Moses went out to visit his people again, he saw 2 Hebrew men fighting. "Why are you beating up your friend?" Moses said to the one who had started the fight. And the man replied, "Who appointed you to be our prince and judge? Are you going to kill me as you killed that Egyptian yesterday?" That's how we know Moses was not a good looker around her, because clearly he was seen by someone and the rumor is already spreading. Then Moses was afraid, thinking, "Everyone knows what I did." And sure enough, Pharaoh heard what had happened, and he tried to have Moses killed. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in the land of Midian. When Moses arrived in Midian, he sat down beside a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters who came as usual to draw water and fill the water troughs for their father's flock. But some other shepherds came and chased them away. So Moses jumped up and rescued the girls from the shepherds. He drew water for their flocks. When the girls returned to rule, that's an area I can't pronounce well, their father, he asked, "Why are you back so soon?" "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds," they answered, "and then he drew water for us and watered our flocks." "Then where is he?" their father asked. "Why did you leave him there? Invite him to come and eat with us." And Moses accepted the invitation, and he settled there with them. In time, Reuel gave Moses his daughter Zipporah to be his wife. Later, she gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, for he explained, "I have been a foreigner in a foreign land." Years passed, and the king of Egypt died, but the Israelites continued to groan under the burden of slavery. They cried out for help, and their cry rose up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he looked down on the people of Israel and knew it was time to act. Let's talk about a few things that just happened, because we're in Moses's kind of midlife crisis here. Moses is a person with strong emotions. We see that. And he tried to take matters into his own hands. It tells me he has a radical sense of justice. We see that in 2 examples from what we just read. He reacts to seeing his own people being beaten and treated poorly, and so he kills the Egyptian. And then immediately realizes that that was probably not the best way to have handled the situation, and he runs away to Midian and hides from Pharaoh. But when he gets there, right, we just read this, when he gets there, he's seeing some shepherds be mean to these girl shepherds, and he thinks that that is not right, and he jumps up and defends them. He is a quick defender of people. He is filled with the need and thirst for justice and for righteousness. And he is trying to fill the gap. Moses has some growth he needs to do. Moses is taking matters into his own hands. That's what happened with the Egyptian that he buried. He decided to take matters into his own hands. We're talking about basically a prince of Egypt who is raised in the palace and probably may have had a more diplomatic way of approaching the Pharaoh and trying to get relief for his people, but he doesn't even try that path. He just immediately reacts in rage and makes a very bad decision that sets his life on a different course. But we can't judge Moses, friends, because how many of us have made a decision in haste, in emotion, that has altered the course of our lives? That happens. But often, that's not the end of the story. That's not the sad, devastating part that we sometimes get caught up in. Often, that's where growth happens. That's where God can do his best work. In hindsight, we can say, oh, this was a bad idea and we probably should have done it differently, or this is what Moses probably should have done, or this is what this person should do. But the reality is that when in these mistakes, in these times, that's hindsight, right? Like in the moment when you're making mistakes and you think that that's devastating and it's the end of the world and you're on the run from whatever, in your own life. Like Moses is on the run for his life. Hopefully you're not dealing with something quite so intense. But in any case, we're still all dealing with intense type situations and with things that we know have deterred the path of our life, right? And so he's gone and made this mistake and he's sitting there by the well and he's still feeling all of these emotions and he is still who he is. Moses is going to become a great leader, and he is on his journey to becoming. Every part of his story will play into who he is becoming. That's why he's such a pivotal and important person that we can draw so much from, because we are all on a journey of becoming who we are, not becoming someone different. Moses is filled with the need for justice, and at some point he is going to be the leader of the people who hands out justice. He is conditioned for this. It's part of his personality, his temperament, like who he is. He's just not fine-tuned it because he needs some spiritual growth. And here we see that playing out over and over for him already. And it's kind of setting the stage for us to say, he's gone and made himself a new home. And Moses probably thinks that this is the end of his story, or he'll just live out his days here. He's content to do so. He is in this place of, where he has made mistakes and now he ends up here and he's making the best of his life. He's got a wife, he's got a son, and he might think that that is it for his life at this juncture. However, we see the Lord. In verse 23, again, it tells us years passed and the king of Egypt died, so he's not afraid for his life anymore in that way. But the Israelites continue to groan under the burden of slavery. They cried out for help, and their cry rose up to God. Can I tell you, friends, personally, when I'm reading between the lines context for scripture, I think that they'd been complaining and suffering and struggling. But this is the first time we see where they remembered to cry out to God. They cried out for help, and God heard them. I think they'd been suffering for quite a while. I think they'd been under struggle for quite a while. I think they'd been complaining about it. I think they were unhappy about it for sure. But this tells us this is when they cried out. Because I got to look at it. I'm being transparent and honest with you. Sometimes I look at the things and I'm like, God, I don't understand. I don't understand why you let this happen. I don't understand why you allowed it to continue for so long. And I'm struggling with why you would do that. Why would this God who loves his chosen people do this, allow this, whatever? And I told you, at the beginning, God really opened my eyes and said, sometimes you do it to yourself, right? They were powerful and they had the ability to prevent it, perhaps. And they let it happen because they didn't walk in their power. Friend, you have to know that you have a power and authority through Jesus. And you don't have to let things happen. Not everything that happens in your life, it's the will of God. That is inaccurate. Sometimes there are things you let happen. And when you find yourself in these situations, which we all do, that's not judgment. That's just relatability, right? We all do it. We all make these types of mistakes. That's the growth plan of life. And when we find ourselves, instead of just complaining about this circumstance that we're in, and even complaining to God, even in prayer, sometimes we're just complaining to God. This tells us that they cried out for help and God heard them. How often are we not just expressing frustration to God, but actually surrendering and coming humbly before God and saying, I need you. We need your help. Help me, please. And he heard them and answers the call and decides it is time to move. And it does word it like that. However, we can see, because Moses is already over 40 years old at this point, right? Moses has escaped, run to Midian. Moses was protected as a baby. It says God knew it was time to move, but God's been planning his time to move. Moses has this incredible rescue story because he's going to be an incredible rescuer. And so God already was working before the Israelites even called out to him for help. He knew the time was coming, and now the time had arrived. He knew it was time to act and was ready to act on his people. And some amazing, incredible miracles and some really hard things are going to happen over the next many years. And we are going to talk about all of those things and how important it is to our history and how we can really get and grow in our own spiritual walk from knowing this story. I love going over the book of Exodus with you guys. I think it is so incredibly valuable. I hope that you will take time this week to read Exodus 1 and 2 for yourselves, which I know we read together, but girl, you got to read things for yourself is very, very important. I also have a really good journal prompt for you to think about and consider for your own walk this week. Literally write it down, your fear, your waiting, your frustration. What are you dealing with right now? What's an uncertainty or a struggle that you're just like holding your breath? I feel like you're just holding your breath, like waiting for God to show up, but you're just keeping it on the inside. I want you to exhale and write it down and be vulnerable and honest about the struggle that you're having and the fear that you're fighting, and just surrender it to God and ask for his genuine help. God, this is the problem that I'm having. This is the challenge that I'm facing. And I know that you already know, but I'm telling you so that I can surrender it into your hands and trust you and know that in the same way you showed up for Moses and for Moses' mother and provided an incredible miracle, I know that you're going to do that for me, and I can't wait to see how that's going to play out. We are embracing life with curious anticipation because we know that it will be well. It's just a matter of seeing how God does it. That's the interesting part. Write down that this week for yourself and really think on that and just let it go. Just say, you know what, Lord, I know that you're going to deal with it. I'd like you to move a little quicker than you are maybe, but I am surrendering this to you and I am asking for your help. And I love and trust you in Jesus' name. And see how God shows up in your life when you have this prayer time and reflection with sincerity. Girls, thank you so much for staying all the way to the end. I appreciate and love spending this time with you, and I cannot wait till next episode where we continue to talk about the incredible, extraordinary life of Moses. Until then, girl, read your Bible.